I'd always craved a place where I could breathe free, far from the stifling grip of HOAs with their endless rules about mailbox colors and lawn lengths. That's why I bought my 10-acre plot just outside the Cedar Hollow Homeowners Association in Pinewood County, Montana, a cookie-cutter subdivision bordered by a scraggly grass buffer abutting my land. My property was my sanctuary, with room for my small cattle operation, a weathered but sturdy barn, and the privacy to live without a clipboard hovering over my fence. But Edward Prescott, the self-proclaimed king of Cedar Hollow's HOA, had other ideas. He believed his authority stretched beyond his pristine cul-de-sacs right into my barn. Big mistake. When he and his lackey, Vernon Tate, broke in, they didn't just cross a line, they stumbled into 15,000 pounds of very pissed-off bulls. What followed was a clash of egos, property destruction, and a reckoning that left Cedar Hollow buzzing with controversy. My barn, 50 yards from the HOA's boundary, housed my 5 Angus bulls, massive, mostly docile creatures that demanded respect. I'd secured it with heavy-duty locks, impeccable fencing, and no trespassing signs so bold you'd have to be blind or stupid to miss them. My land was outside Cedar Hollow's jurisdiction, and I cherished that freedom. But Edward, whose ego seemed to swell with every HOA meeting, saw my property as a blemish on his suburban utopia. It started with a sniveling email from an HOA secretary about my fence's unharmonious color. I replied that my land wasn't their business. Then came a registered letter demanding I trim my pines because they shaded their unused picnic area. I declined, suggesting they plant shade-tolerant flowers. Edward didn't grasp it. He couldn't fathom a world where his word wasn't law. One morning, I caught Edward at the fence line, clipboard in hand, eyeing my equipment shed like it personally insulted him. Conducting a visual assessment, he declared, chest puffed. Ensuring adjacent structures meet community standards. I kept my cool, laying it out. Edward, your rules stop at that fence. My property, my standards. He muttered about property values, implying my barn was tanking his residents' home prices. I walked away, dismissing it as a Napoleon complex. But Edward wasn't just annoying. He was dangerous, convinced his HOA presidency granted him dominion over anything in his sight. My barn became his obsession. Emails sharpened, claiming my decades-old, agriculturally zoned barn was an unapproved outbuilding and an aesthetic nuisance. He cited bylaws that only applied within Cedar Hollow. I responded with county records, zoning laws, and my deed, each reply less polite. Edward ignored facts, forming a boundary standards committee with his sycophant, Vernon, a man who seemed to dream of issuing parking tickets. Their mission: monitor my property. Soon, they were lurking at my fence, sometimes with binoculars, pointing at my barn or the bulls grazing peacefully. It escalated from irritating to creepy. I started snapping photos of their surveillance, checking my signs, and recording every encounter. One afternoon, they were bolder, standing right at the fence, Edward gesturing wildly at the barn, Vernon nodding like a bobblehead. I approached. Find something interesting? Edward launched into a spiel about my barn's structural risks and the bulls being intimidating to trail walkers. He demanded to inspect my barn for safety. Vernon chimed in, just a precaution. I shut them down. You have no authority here. My barn's fine. My bulls are secure, and you're not stepping foot on my land. I held up my phone, recording. This is me refusing your illegal demand. Edward's face reddened. Your refusal forces us to pursue other avenues. It was bluster, but I'd checked with county code enforcement. My setup was bulletproof. Clara, a neighbor in Cedar Hollow, tipped me off that Edward was spinning tales at HOA meetings, claiming my bulls' bellows were disruptive and my barn was a collapse risk, painting me as a reckless outsider, threatening their perfect community. I saved every letter, photo, and recording, sensing a storm brewing, unaware how far Edward would go until he crossed a line nobody could ignore. It was a Tuesday afternoon. I'd gone to town for fencing supplies, leaving the barn locked and the bulls lounging. I returned around 3 p.m. and something felt wrong. The heavy padlock on the barn door was gone. Closer, I saw it mangled on the ground, the door scarred with pry marks.
Someone had broken in.
My heart pounded, not with fear, but fury. Were the bulls hurt?
Loose?
I slid the door open, the wood groaning from the damage. Inside, the air was thick with tension. The bulls were in their stalls, but agitated, pacing, eyes wild, one splintering a stall board with a kick. Bedding was scattered, a water bucket overturned. No theft, my tools and feed were untouched. This wasn't robbery, it was intrusion. I scanned the scene. Footprints in the dust, work boots and, tellingly, dress shoes like Vernon's loafers. Near the property line, tire tracks led towards Cedar Hollow's pavement, fresh in the damp earth. The truth hit like a sledgehammer. Edward and Vernon had broken in. Their harassment, demands, and timing pointed to them. I called the sheriff, reporting a break-in and vandalism, then photographed everything. The lock, door, footprints, tracks. The deputy arrived, took notes, and agreed the lack of theft screamed personal. "Folks get territorial," he said, handing me a report number. "Get cameras." As he left, Clara called, her voice electric. "You won't believe this." Hours earlier, Edward and Vernon had limped back to the HOA clubhouse, a sight to behold. Vernon's khakis were torn, his ankles sprained. Edward had twigs in his hair, a scratched cheek, and a face red with rage. Their story, emailed to the board, claimed they were inspecting a fence breach when my aggressive bulls charged near the property line. No mention of the lock or barn. It was a lie confirming everything. They'd broken in, startled the bulls, and got scared witless. A 3,000-pound bull snorting in a stall would have sent them scrambling, Vernon tripping, Edward scraping himself in their panic. It was almost funny, but the violation wasn't. I ordered a high-res camera system, night vision, remote alerts, the works, and planned my move. The next evening, I waited near Cedar Hollow's common area, knowing Edward took smug post-dinner strolls. Right on cue, he appeared, Vernon hobbling behind. I approached, phone recording. "Edward Vernon." I began, voice steady. "Sheriff visited yesterday. My barn was broken into, lock destroyed, pry marks." Edward smirked. "Heard about your security lapse. Maybe those dangerous bulls." I ignored the bait. "Funny, it happened when residents saw you two coming back looking rough." "Vernon, hurt your leg?" Vernon paled. Edward snapped. "We were checking a fence breach. Your bulls were aggressive." I pounced. "So, you didn't break my lock? Didn't enter my barn?" Edward froze. "Of course not." I pressed. "The sheriff has photos, footprints, tire tracks." "Breaking and entering serious, Edward. Lying about attacks to cover it? Risky." Edward's face drained as he saw the recording. "This is over," he barked, dragging Vernon away. "I had them. I compiled everything. The sheriff's report, photos, footprints, tracks, Edward's letters, my replies, the confrontation recording, and Clara's statement about their disheveled return. I got quotes for door repairs, a new lock, and cameras. My property lawyer, grinning at the evidence, said, "Edward screwed. Breaking and entering was a clear crime, likely uninsured under the HOA's policy, meaning personal liability. Their injuries during trespassing? Their fault." We drafted a demand letter to Edward, CC to the board, detailing the harassment, break-in, evidence, and sheriff's report, demanding payment for repairs, cameras, legal fees, a board apology, and a guarantee against future interference, with a 15-day deadline, or we'd sue for damages and push criminal charges. I wrote a flyer. An illegal break-in occurred at the adjacent property, with evidence implicating HOA reps acting beyond authority. This risks HOA liability and higher dues. Ask the board what happened. I paid a kid to slip it into every Cedar Hollow mailbox, letting Edward spin that. I sent Clara's statement and the recording to the sheriff, requesting trespassing and vandalism charges. The letter landed like a grenade. The HOA's lawyer called mine, panicked. The board, blindsided by Edward's recklessness, faced a revolt as residents, fueled by my flyer, demanded answers. Would dues skyrocket? Was Edward dragging them into a lawsuit? The HOA's insurer, Detecting criminal acts signaled no coverage for damages, leaving Edward and Vernon exposed. At an emergency meeting, the sheriff, armed with my evidence, charged both with misdemeanor trespassing and vandalism. Edward caved. The settlement granted everything: full payment for repairs, cameras, fees, a board apology admitting the illegal entry and affirming my rights, and a pledge to never trespass again. Edward and Vernon were forced to resign amid resident fury. Their HOA empire crumbled. They pleaded no contest to the charges, earning fines and probation. I watched them leave the courthouse, deflated, their power stripped. My barn stood stronger, cameras glaring at the fence line, bulls munching, unaware of their role in justice. Cedar Hollow split. Some cheered my stand, others whispered I'd gone too far. But on my land, free from Edward's tyranny, I knew I'd drawn a line no clipboard could cross. Know your rights, document everything, and never let a petty dictator push you, especially with 15,000 pounds of backup.